All right, welcome back. Something Ventured, Part 2. This is Peter Shanley talking about lean startups, technology, his experience at Yahoo. Welcome back to Something Ventured.
We are in a special time and place here in San Francisco.
Well, so we've been talking about that on the podcast, which is if you listen to most people think about innovation in Silicon Valley, their view of the world is that there's, and last week I had someone on who'd run a software company in Budapest, and what the employees were like there and how grateful they were to be working as software developers and all that. And the typical view of the world is there's, like 1,000 companies. They're all startups. One of them's Uber. And yet the vast majority of the work in the world gets done by enormous companies, Boeing, HP. Mm-hmm. And they're all trying to innovate. I mean, you've put this before. They're trying to innovate and become nimble or get some of the DNA, avoid being disrupted, whatever the cliche is.
It's interesting. It's, today the average life of a company on the S&P 500 is as low as it's ever been. I think it's 18 years. It used to be like 60 to 70.
Right.
Incumbents have a lower barrier to entry than ever before.
Yeah.
It's easier to reach consumers than ever before, right?
Yep.
You have all sorts of, things that you can bake into your product to make it viral. You have all sorts of, cheap ad exchanges.
Yeah.
A lot of that has been democratized,
right.
Which means you get a lot of shit, coming up from the bottom, but it does make it much easier to kind of get up and running.
Yeah.
What used to cost, $10 million you can do with $100K now.
That's right
now.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing is, all of these startups, where they've got, this camaraderie and paid for lunches and
right.
MacBook Airs and all this bullshit. It's like all of them want to be successful. They all want to grow up and become the companies they're all bagging right now, right? It's
right.
kind of, we threw a conference in London, and there's a doctor there, Tendai Vicky, who teaches entrepreneurship, who used to rap, and he was joking about how, enterprise is like the M&M, right? Everybody wants to make fun of it, and then you're like, oh wait, they're actually really good.
Yeah, right.
Right? It's like, Ward Cunningham has this great quote around, business is designed so that people who may not like each other can get shit done.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
He's like, he's the father of the agile movement. He's like, you get a paycheck, right? Like this actually is a means to an end. There's this kind of false notion that your passions and your professional life, and you should be in flow every day, and
right.
everything should be aligned. And sure, if you can have passionate pursuit of your job, that's lovely when you can marry those things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, all the jobs in the world have to be done, right? Somebody has to do the insurance. Well, people probably love that job too, but somebody has to do the insurance calculations and adjustments and that kind of stuff, and file the thing and
there's this tension, right, between extracting efficiency out of an existing thing, or creating new value or new markets, right? So it's basically all, MBAs in Silicon Valley get bagged a lot, right? It was the town for engineers. Google showed us that, and then Apple and Pinterest showed us that designers, held the keys.
Yeah.
And so everyone kind of poo-poos the old MBA here, and there is a lot of value in an MBA. One of the issues is just it is still anchored in a lot of the old industrial age of these are factory workers. Everybody has a specific role, a specific function. Follow the plan, do it as efficiently as possible, and in today's world, that just falls flat, right? It is still useful to extract efficiency out of what's working today, but you also need to invest a percentage of your capital in discovering the next thing, right? So
I guess big companies now have decided they don't want to be, well, two things. One, they don't want to be disrupted, which is this term we throw around all the time, but they don't want a small company to take over what they do. And second of all, if you're certain companies, you're like, wait a minute, we're worth a market cap $8 billion. Uber's worth $17 billion. We need to.
Well, you look at that. It's the old Kodak thing, right? It's Kodak had this great history. All of these employees, and then you see, Instagram come and valued basically higher.
Yeah.
With 13 people or whatever they had.
It's crazy.
And what's interesting is it's really hard to balance delivery and discovery, right?
Yeah.
If you're a company at scale today, you do need to deliver today's value more efficiently because that's critical to your business. But how do you invest in that. It's not just people and time, but how do you tool your processes to allow for some of your teams to go off and explore new directions that will be your future, right? And
so everyone
does it different.
What are the big companies around the world outside of Silicon Valley? And that was one of the things we talked about in the last podcast, where this guy was saying, there's great developers. He was frustrated with the sort of like, okay, you can't find a developer to save your life in San Francisco, even if you're paying them enormous amounts of money to work on something cool. But he's like, in Budapest and around the world, there's great developers that you can hire. There's great people working in corporations all over the world too. Like there's this sort of thesis that they're maybe not as smart as we are. Not true. Like they're
100%.
just doing something different. But
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We laugh a bit. It's good for business, but it's not perhaps reality. Everybody looks to Silicon Valley, right? Everybody wants to come here for a conference and get the keys to the castle, or open up a little office here or a lab and put Silicon Valley magic in a bottle and bring it back to the mothership. Yeah. And
so what's driving that with corporate? If you're a big corporation, what do you...
Well, there's a lot of things that have gone well here, right? There's a lot of practices and there's a lot of companies that have emerged here that should be looked to for inspiration and adoption, right? There is, in a lot of this is kind of that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, right? It's like we have had a lot of practice here because failure has been more acceptable. So people have just more muscle memory of taking these risks and they're more comfortable with it. There's an amazing kind of confluence of academia, big business, and government here, right? That kind of was this like melange that produced really amazing culture and companies. Now it's interesting. So I was in Puerto Rico a year ago, and I was meeting with the Secretary of Economic Development, and we were talking about how digital and how software can help create jobs and raise that country, that island up. And they had opened up this new kind of beautiful office space, and it was going to have this social gaming accelerator thing. And I was kind of like, what's the goal of that? And he's like, create jobs. It's like, well, if the goal was to get more young people into math and science, opening up a social gaming lab sounds like a fantastic strategy to achieve that goal. Yeah. If your goal was creating jobs, why wouldn't you anchor your accelerator in your traditional strengths of pharmaceuticals and manufacturing?
Interesting, yeah.
Right? Like, everybody wants Angry Birds. It's easy to point to that. But, like, there are assets and there are strengths in these regions that some of the magic of Silicon Valley can sprinkle on top of to great effect. But, like, you don't need to recreate, exactly what's gone on over there, right? Yeah. It's like, you look at some of the kind of new focus on the Midwest, right? We're seeing, Light Bank in Chicago, they made their money in disrupting transportation, right? Like, nothing wrong with that. You see some new VC activity in Columbus, Ohio. Chris Olson and his team.
Who just said this? What's his? Mark Andreessen said, or Horowitz, or one of those guys, basically said there should be like 500 Silicon Valleys, but they shouldn't be Silicon Valleys. Exactly. So if you're Utah, I mean, maybe we're not going to allow drones to fly around San Francisco, so maybe in Utah that's okay. Maybe we're the drone Silicon Valley, or maybe the Bitcoin Silicon Valley is in Moscow or something like that. But being the Silicon Valley isn't really going to work.
And you see, it's interesting. At NEO we have offices in a bunch of different regions, and it's a blessing and a curse. It's awesome to be close to different customer bases. When we're doing research, it's great to have that kind of breadth of different perspectives. It's kind of a cluster of business operations and culture, but we're getting through it. But it's kind of funny when we look across the company and across the globe, and Singapore will talk about some of the work they're doing in shipping and finance and kind of natural resource extraction. New York, we have got a lot of media work, right, in financial services. And then they will laugh about San Francisco, and they're like, oh, the connected kitty litter box. Go with your cute projects. And it's this fun tension inside the company of just seeing the different styles of work that we're bidding on and working on.
This is amazing. So what are the big companies trying to accomplish? Like, what do they think is going to happen? Like, so the range is they can do they can send someone to Silicon Valley to learn something that probably doesn't do a lot.
There's like it's interesting. There's no kind of check boxes for success. There's all sorts of different approaches and tools and processes, and enlightened leaders will pick the right tool from the shed for the job at hand, right? And so, we have seen everything from, hey, let's just send someone to Lean Startup Conference or Disrupt. That's a minimal investment. To, let's bring people from Silicon Valley into our company to do a workshop and get us all jazzed up. We've seen people open up very small offices focused on mergers and acquisitions or, investing or business development. We have seen people, bring just a design team and anchor them in San Francisco, and they're supposed to translate everything. And then everything up to the extreme of Walmart Labs, which has created a core business unit that functions out here and is hiring like mad and splashing cash to compete with Google and Facebook and actually assembling a great team.
And what are they working on? Like, what would Walmart Labs?
I mean, it's interesting. There's kind of like two main styles of innovation that we have seen here. There is kind of architectural innovation, which is, hey, we're going to maintain today's customer base and value proposition, but completely, reboot how we deliver that, right? So the simple example is like JCPenney online. Right? Hey, we've got this brick and mortar delivery system. It's inefficient. It sucks. There's this whole e-commerce thing. Let's do that. And then there's kind of, deeper horizon innovation where they're looking at new markets, new customers, potentially new value propositions that oftentimes cannibalize today's business. And those are the bigger bets and the bigger risk. And it is very, very, very difficult to get it right. So you look at something like Hulu, right? Hulu had to go off-brand, and they were part of GE, NBC, and to do what they did, they had to basically be a separate company, which it's hard to find leaders who have the stomach for that. You've got some interesting kind of in traditional research here. You've got a lot of people who are judged against filing patents and intellectual property, which is high risk, potentially high reward. But it's rare that a company can launch a new product that then becomes a new business. Within the constructs of the kind of main mothership who's focused on delivering today's value, right? Because there also is a very big difference between a product and a business, right? You could have the best product, but if you don't have the cost of customer acquisition lower, 3 times lower than the lifetime value of that person, you don't have a business.
So what's a corporation to do? Like, what is? I mean, the model that I see. Maybe works is this sort of the big financial services companies, Amex and guys like that, kind of have guys in Silicon Valley who are keeping an eye on things. And what they basically do is wait until the company's big enough that it's an acquisition target. So they're making sure that, I guess they've sort of got their forward scouts here, making sure they don't get sideswiped by something. They have enough capital to buy the thing when it becomes a thing. But that's about it. They're not trying to create their own, whatever, next gen crazy.
You look at something like, so acquisitions are a huge part of this, right? You look at Twitch TV getting bought by Amazon. Amazon has decidedly kept Twitch as a wholly owned subsidiary. So the CEO of Twitch is still the CEO of Twitch. He's not the executive vice president of, that division. What's interesting is that all of these tactics can be done well and can succeed and can bear fruit. All of those tactics can completely be screwed by people, process, and culture, right? So it's like all of these tactics should be approached by a company, but it should be approached with an open mind and honestly incremental investment so that they can test the waters on these things, figure out what works for them in their context, and double down on what's working and kill what's not, right? So it's all of these things, should be invested in incrementally. And they'll hopefully be able to see if they have measures and they're going towards KPIs, which should be continued. We talk about sometimes there's like the minimum viable innovation, right? Like start with the smallest thing and build upon your learning. And also respect that, I think it's Intuit that kind of has been public about how they break it down. 60% of their capital is focused on what they're doing today and making that more efficient and perhaps kind of incrementally enhancing that experience, right? 30 or 10% of their capital is focused on discovering customer love.
Oh, wow.
Right, discovering painful problems that people get excited about a solution to.
Yeah.
And then 30% of their capital is focused upon translating love to product.
Really?
And so, not everyone in your company can go out there doing the street intercepts, cool customer development, fancy lean startup stuff, right? It's like, companies need to be transparent and say, like, hey, like, most of you people are going to just put your head down and execute the plan.
Right.
Maybe we can rotate people through that 10% that get to do the fun future stuff.
Yeah.
Just so everyone gets a taste of it and maybe bring some of that energy back into the core operations.
Right.
But like, most of your companies should be focused on like
doing what they're doing.
Doing the damn plan.
Yeah. That's right.
Not, at Brickhouse at Yahoo,
What was Brickhouse?
So Brickhouse was an interesting experiment, right? So it was basically formed during an acquisition spree. So Yahoo bought Flickr, My Blog Log, Jump Cut. There are a couple, acquisitions that happened around the same time.
Okay.
And so they opened an office in San Francisco, they had a lot of foresight. It was one of the first major Silicon Valley companies to have a presence here. Mm-hmm. It's very normal now, but we were on South Park. We had these teams from the acquisitions. They then kind of poached some of the best and the brightest from around Yahoo, potentially as like a way to keep them in the company.
Right.
We got MacBooks by default instead of
Whoa.
PCs.
Yeah.
All sorts of we had Nintendo Wiis in the office.
Right.
We had a facilities manager with a handlebar mustache.
Oh, wow, you're the real deal. Wow.
And we almost got it right. Like we had enough freedom to make creative decisions.
Yeah.
And we had theoretically enough controls to be able to pass projects off. Right. We had Yahoo Pipes, which was a great success that they didn't believe could become a business, which is basically if this then that. We had Fire Eagle, which was a location platform that had all sorts of amazing privacy kind of features built into it.
It sounds like Xerox PARC, where they kind of invented everything, the mouse and the GUI interface and all that, but other people monetized
We
it.
had a gamification platform that we just launched internally called Bravos that came out of Gordon Luck and Leonard Lin, who did Upcoming, another acquisition.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a gamification platform. You could give someone a badge for showing up to stand up on time 4 days in a row, to giving you a ride to work that day, inspired by us playing Xbox a lot.
Yeah.
We had some interesting things that just kind of fizzled on the vine because we had 3 or 4 CEOs in 3 years.
Yeah. And what specifically, why didn't it work? Was it
And honestly, it had personally not enough connection to people down in Sunnyvale. So there are real constraints that R&D labs must live under, right? If you're not going to maintain your system, it must be maintained by corporate IT and ops.
Right.
There are legitimate constraints to that, right?
Yeah.
We were coding things in Ruby on Rails because we loved that language and framework.
Yeah.
And it's a PHP shop. And so the paranoids who ran security and privacy and a lot of the infrastructure folk, needed to either be trained to do this. We needed to hire some people to do our own maintenance and ops. Yeah. Those are real constraints that we were kind of given too much freedom, and maybe we could have had more impact on the world with our product if we had bought into the fact that that living within these constraints, look at the impact you get. You then have the opportunity to have someone else maintain your system, right? Hey, if you follow the rules, we have a global sales force of people at HP Labs, right? When I was there, and so I think we were a little bit too free at Yahoo, which was essential for us to explore these new spaces of gamification, of geolocation. But the handoffs of kind of that kind of putting authority where the information is. We were closest to the customers. We were closest to our code. We should be allowed to make flexible and fast decisions.
Yeah.
But we didn't really respect, I think, some of the controls that might have
Right.
made those handoffs more successful.
Well, and if Yahoo and HP can't get it right, like who the hell is going to be able to do this right?
Yeah, I mean, those...
And again,
We'll see. So, I mean, so today there's some amazing examples, right? So we've got, what they're doing at Etsy is incredible, right?
Okay,
So
right.
at Etsy, during their busiest time of the year, 2 years ago, I saw some data. During the holidays 2 years ago, they pushed to production 175 times. In that 35-day period.
Holy crap.
That is the most business critical time for them, and they're still,
Right.
they still are tooled to be agile and keep pushing things live.
Where most retail companies shut down any production code changes between whatever it is, September and December.
At people like Amazon, right? They're pushing code to production every 11.2 seconds or something insane.
Right.
You look at places like Netflix. At Netflix, the lore is that any team is empowered to change the customer experience on 1% of their audience.
Oh yeah, okay.
And it's
so if you're like, hey, I think if this image was bigger, it'd be better. And they're like, all right, push it out, 1%,
test on 1%, show us the data, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the extreme, the ridiculous examples of Google, split testing 50 Shades of Blue,
right?
Is that's where the science kind of takes a little too much from the art of it, right? Like there is this tension, this balance between data driven and insights driven and kind of hunch driven, and good teams are tooled to walk that line and balance back and forth, right? It's I do this whole spiel called awkward in, awesome out.
What the heck does that mean?
It's pushing people into uncomfortable situations to use their gut or to focus on numbers, or pushing engineers to give qualitative research interviews, pushing designers to code, pushing business people to slog through iteration planning meetings, or pushing executives to actually interview a stranger about their product. One of my favorite things at HP was getting an executive in the laptop division to give a interview to his secretary, right? He wasn't going to interview the people that I hacked off of Craigslist to bring in to do research. But his secretary knew that he was at the gym when he told his wife he had a meeting because he needed to work out, blah, blah, blah. So she was trusted, right? So he gives her an interview. And in this interview, I gave him the script and everything. He discovers that despite purchasing for his secretary the best HP laptop and printer, she printed from her MacBook.
Okay.
So HP created AirPrint, and of course didn't brand it HP, and it was actually an awesome product that you could print from an Apple wirelessly to an HP printer. And we did all the work and got none of the brand from it, but such is life.
Yeah.
He discovered that despite having the best equipment, she didn't print using her HP laptop.
Yeah.
And he's just like drops his coffee, and he's like, "Wow, the HP devices don't work well together."
Right.
Like, all of the numbers I've been looking at, all of the people in meetings who've told me we're on track, or the roadmap is being met. Like, holy shit, what a wake up, right? And so it's putting people in those awkward situations. If there is an understanding of why they're there, really cool stuff can happen. And there's that. Weird stuff happens when you go art and science, and when you look at the data, but then also marry it with qualitative feedback because you actually talk to humans, right?
Yeah. Yeah, what was is it Steve Blank who wrote Four Steps to the Epiphany, where he talks about getting out of the building. It's more enterprise software that he's talking about, but it's a really interesting insight that people think that they're just churning away inside the company and they're doing a beta test of their enterprise software, and then I think in it he goes and asks the CTO who's doing the beta test, like, would you ever pay for this? And the guy's like, oh, no, we don't have budget for that.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, like everything we thought that didn't involve talking to our customer or user was kind of wrong.
Well, and there's a lot of layers to that, right? What people say and do are very different. When I was at Yahoo, I worked in kind of behavioral targeting for a bit, and we used to talk about neurological marketing, right? So, not only do people lie when they're talking to you because they think of what you want them to say.
Yeah, they want to make you happy.
Right?
Yeah.
People also lie to themselves without knowing it because, you have all of these societal things baked in. And so there's this awesome study around Super Bowl ads from like a decade ago. And if you asked people what the top 5 ads that were, they were like, oh, that Britney Spears ad, that Frog Budweiser ad was awesome. The Doritos ad had all the explosions. And then when you actually like put suction cups on them and look at their pupils dilating and galvanic skin response, it turns out that 1-800-CALL-ATT, or these ads that are like just terrible, that your conscious mind says like that is like poor taste, but like subconsciously like it's effective, right? It's like
interesting.
You look at like NBC, right, and it's NBC.
Yeah, that's
actually a perfect chord. That's the letters GEC for General Electric Corporation. And when you hear those sounds together, something happens inside your head. Right?
Incredible, that's amazing.
And long story short, why it's important to get out of the building is you actually have to do stuff. You have to like put people in a situation that is as much like real life as possible, so that you can potentially trust what the hell they say to you. Like giving people a survey is very different than like sitting them down and walking them through wireframes.
Well, that was one of the, when I joined the company I work for now, Nuzzle, social news site founded by Jonathan Abrams, who founded Friendster. Before he raised money, he built the product and gave it to a bunch of friends. And what he did, that should be obvious, but maybe not, and all his friends said they loved the product. But he's like, yeah, but all your friends always say they love your product. And what he did is he then waited 3 months, didn't talk about it, and then looked at the database to see if they're still using the product. And when he saw that they were actually using it 3 months after they had any social responsibility to him to say, I love it, that's when he raised money.
Well, I mean, when Odeo did their 2-week experiment to turn TextMob, which was created to protest the Republican convention in Denver in 2006. When they ran their 2-week sprint as they were running out of money because Apple crushed the podcast business for them, they kind of rebooted TextMob into this thing they called Twitter. And what they saw,
how'd that work?
Was just, I mean, I think it's okay.
It's okay.
They're doing all right. They're bringing jobs to Market Street, so at least there's that. But when they saw the usage, it was insane. People were racking up phone bills. This was before texting was
on Twitter,
unlimited.
and they were
and it was
$1,000 a month bills, right?
I mean, so there's this famous quote from Henry Ford, right? If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. First off, he didn't say that. That's not like a real quote.
It's a good story, though.
It's a great story.
Makes a point.
But what it says is, people are very bad at saying what they want. They should.
Well, the other one is no one ever asked for an integrated circuit.
Yeah.
Right.
But people can tell you what they want, and from that, if you're a smart, active listener, you can tease out why they want it and what the problem is, right? Another great one is, Steve Jobs was super famous for, totally bashing what customers don't want until we give it to them, right? And if you actually take that quote in its full context for the full paragraphs, he talks about how much Apple invests in research. Right? It's like, it's not either or. It's like, people aren't going to tell you what to build for them. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them.
You do need some common sense. I mean, that's the Google thing where they're iterating and iterating on the color of blue, because it's a really satisfying thing you can do. You can measure it and all that, but nobody comes along and says, well, you should just do it completely differently. Like when Google came along, everyone else was doing putting things in categories, right? Like, we're going to organize the web into categories. And Google itself didn't say, we're going to come up with a better categorization system. They just said, why don't we just sort it by inbound links? Like, they just came with some completely different idea.
Well, they also said categories is kind of what you are putting, those items into certain buckets, and that's you saying these are the categories, right? But if you actually let people's intent and actions control, the output, interesting shit can happen, because like, maybe as I'm doing Google searches, I don't want to go into this bucket for all of the data and the knowledge and information I want. Maybe it's going to go cut across, because my use case has aviation and travel and like, what's the weather in Acapulco, right? It's like,
exactly.
Don't overthink it and put don't tell your customer what they want, let them tell you.
Well, those are the best stories, and they may be apocryphal, but Yelp has a story where initially it was kind of something else. You'd add as a Q&A thing or something like that, and a small group of people were just using the crap out of the reviews. Like, they were digging. It wasn't a major part of the site, and as the story goes, people were reviewing the crap out of things. And
I mean, a very classic example there is PayPal, right? So PayPal was originally a Palm Pilot to Palm Pilot payments device. And that's what they were for years. And there was this tiny feature buried into the service that said, or send money via email. And even with the data, they were still so they had their blinders on, because we are a Palm Pilot to Palm Pilot payments company. And it wasn't until their backs were a bit against the wall that they were finally like, man, there's some data over here that we now need to make some decisions based on.
Palm Pilot, holy crap. So we can wrap it up, but I want to ask you a couple things before you go. First of all, what do you think of the new Yahoo? Do you have any perspective on Marissa and anything she's doing, or do we even know what she's doing?
You know what? I think she has been great, right? So hiring for them, I hear, is easier than before. Stock price is better than before. Yeah. Morale seems to be better. Yeah. We'll see if those leading indicators result in lagging like profit and business value, right, and hopefully, product delight. Yeah. We haven't really seen that, right? So Flickr just got a reboot in the last bit. My gut says that initiative started well before she got there, and they operate fairly independently. Yeah. But just continuing to give them a sandbox. Yeah. Kudos for that. Yeah. So we'll see if the seeds that she's planted in the last couple of years bear fruit. I think as someone who likes products, I'd like to see.
Has she said what she's doing? Like, is she? Like, it's all about the finance or anything like that, or it hasn't really come out with that kind of thing yet?
I have. There's other actors higher up on my radar, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So what? The final thing I'll ask you is like, what's advice to the CEO of a big company? Like, what are they to do to get the Silicon Valley thing? Don't kid themselves.
It's I spiel on this thing like, put authority where the information is. Mm-hmm. It is very hard for CEOs to balance this delivery and discovery, right? It's their CFO has been trained to have these big financial models that are accurately hit, that predict the future, 1 to 5 years in an environment that is not that predictable, right? Yeah. And so it is very interesting. There are enlightened product managers who want to do things in a different way. There are enlightened DevOps people who want to build the infrastructure so that these companies have the luxury to move fast and experiment and be agile, right? There is incredible potential. Like we talk about this Venn diagram of the startup person or the enterprise person, and everybody pictures the enterprise person as this, Dilbert-themed automaton
ridiculous, but
with a pocket protector looking like Andy Sipowicz from NYPD Blue, and that the entrepreneur is this, goateed, horn-rimmed glasses, rad T-shirt wearing, program, and when you actually meet these people, the Venn diagram is almost entirely overlapped, right? Mm-hmm. There are passionate people inside of big companies who give a damn about their customer and who want to do things more effectively and efficiently. There are, the appetite is there. One of the biggest, honestly, constraints we see right now is legal and procurement, right? And we see it not just in big companies, but in government. It needs to be disrupted in this, in the same way where, the legal team, who is very risk averse and protecting your brand and protecting your customer, are all very, important and essential things for a scaled business.
Right.
But you need to use different rules in discovery, right?
Yeah.
Like the legal team should not treat delivery work and discovery work in the same way.
Right.
Procurement in a very similar fashion, right? So Neo, we work on a time and materials basis. We don't do fixed scope work. It takes an incredible amount of trust for clients to want to work with us in this way, right? We say, hey, we deploy the right people in the right roles at the right time of this project. And sometimes we swell up on engineering once we have, removed uncertainty, and we think like, hey, let's invest, in a more robust system. We'll roll people on and off of projects. We're going to, every single week, we're going to work together every day, and you're going to tell us if we're delivering value.
Right.
And we're going to tweak and adjust to make sure that we're delivering the value we're supposed to.
Yeah.
It has been great in the last year or two. We're a young firm, but in the last year or two, we have started to have an easier time having those conversations.
Right.
What's been interesting is even when we have the team that we know we're going to work with, and we have a good cultural fit, even we have the buy-in from the decider, who's the VP who blesses this initiative and says, yes, I've got budget for this. Yeah. The buyer in procurement will oftentimes push back and fight against their own coworker, right?
Sure.
So we found people who want to work in a new way, who want to work with us here. We found an executive champion who's got budget and gives us the vision to drive towards. And then we have, months of battles with legal and procurement.
Yeah.
And you're just like, wow, like,
Right.
guys, like, you have to, like, the world has changed, right? And so, I mean, the biggest advice to kind of leadership is, unlock the potential of the people you have. They want to work in a new way, and they're smart and capable.
Yeah.
But also, you need to drastically change how you tool your procurement system and your legal teams to actually be able to have a little bit of confidence to let certain teams work in a new way.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think we've done this thing. This is good.
All right.
So let's wrap up. How do people get in touch with you?
It is very simple. My email is the letter P at neo.com.
Oh, man.
On Twitter, I'm Peter Shanley, Shanley. I'm always interested in having interesting conversations across civics and
Excellent.
and technology.
All right. So if you want, reach out to Peter. This has been the Something Ventured podcast. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kent.